The sound of metal snapping came from directly above my head, dry and sharp, like someone breaking a chopstick in half. A little rust dust drifted onto the shoulder of my work shirt. I looked up, ran my flashlight along the base of a steel column in the north section of Whitmore Components, and saw a hairline crack creeping across the weld. Above it sat nearly 40 tons of coiled steel. Below it, management was building a stage for the weekend family day, when more than 200 workers would bring their spouses and children to eat hot dogs, listen to country music, and watch Chase Whitmore show off the new production line to investors. I placed 2 fingers against the column. It was vibrating in time with the stamping press at the far end of the plant. Not hard. Not yet. But I had stood inside buildings that had only minutes left to decide whether they wanted to remain buildings or become piles of concrete with people buried underneath. I knew that feeling. If they run this system at full capacity, I said to myself, it won't make it to Sunday. 3 weeks earlier, I had been nothing more than Mara Bennett, the woman on the night shift in a gray uniform whom almost no one in Bellwether, Ohio noticed. I was 44, a single mother, and I drove an old Chevy Silverado with silver paint peeling off the rear door. I had moved back to Bellwether with my son, Noah, after my husband died. The town had once lived on 3 factories, a high school football team, and the belief that if you worked hard, your kids would at least have a better life than you did. By the time I came back, 2 of the factories had closed. Whitmore Components was the last place still handing out steady paychecks on Fridays, and Douglas Whitmore never let anyone forget it. He liked to say he didn't merely own the plant. He was keeping the whole town alive. People who depended on the company's health insurance usually nodded, even when machines leaked oil and workers had to buy their own protective gloves. I took the night maintenance job because it fit. I could drive Noah to school, sleep a few hours, make dinner, then head to the plant while most of the town was watching football or sitting in the rusty mug complaining about property taxes. I didn't tell anyone what I had done before, not because I was ashamed. I had simply spent enough years walking into rooms and watching people sit differently the moment they heard my title. I wanted a place where no one straightened up because I was present. I thought an ordinary job might give me that. Chase Whitmore was the first person to prove I had made things too simple in my head. Chase was 25, wore white dress shirts even on the factory floor, and always had a young man with a camera trailing behind him. Douglas had just made his son vice president of operations, even though Elena Ruiz, who had managed the line for nearly 20 years, said Chase had never completed a full 8-hour shift. He liked filming videos about the future of American manufacturing. During one shoot, I was kneeling beside cutting machine number 4, inspecting a section of melted wiring, when Chase stopped behind me. "Don't shoot from that angle," he told the cameraman. "Nobody wants the cleaning crew in a technology promo." I heard a few nervous laughs. The kind people make when the boss's son says something that isn't funny, but their rent is still due next week. I didn't turn around. I kept removing the machine housing. Chase stepped closer. "Are you sure you're authorized to touch that?" I looked up. He had the smile of someone who had never needed to ask whether he was right, only whether anyone else would dare tell him he was wrong. "I'm authorized to keep it from killing somebody," I said. Chase laughed and turned toward the camera as if I had handed him a perfect line. "All right, everybody. Night shift auntie is saving the world." Then he walked away. I watched him for a second, not because I was offended. I was watching the way he stepped over an oil slick without ever looking down. People like Chase usually believed danger was something that happened to other people. What I didn't expect was for him to notice Noah. My son was 16, skinny, growing so fast his jeans were always too short at the ankles, and unable to resist taking apart any broken radio just to see what was inside. He had asked for a summer job in the warehouse so he could save money for the engineering program at the vocational school. A week later, I heard 2 employees call him the janitor's kid. I asked Noah if anything was wrong. He said no a little too quickly. That was how a kid answered when he didn't want his mother to turn his problem into a bigger one. That night, Elena found me in the loading area. A lifting sling had been tied incorrectly, so I untied it and secured it again with a double rescue knot. She watched my hands longer than necessary, "Where did you learn that?" she asked. "In a few places that aren't standing anymore," I said. Elena didn't laugh. Before she left, she handed me an old maintenance log that had been removed from the electronic system. "I think you should look at the north structure," she said quietly, "and don't enter anything into the office computer if you want it to still exist in the morning." That was the first time anyone in the plant trusted me before knowing who I was. In the log, I found 3 reports of vibration levels exceeding the limit, 2 rejected requests to replace support footings, and a handwritten note saying the sensors on the steel storage level had been temporarily disabled to prevent false alarms. I inspected the area that same night. The actual load on the floor was nearly 1/3 higher than the original design rating. One column base showed fresh orange rust, a sign that water had worked its way into the weld. I took photographs, measured the crack, and submitted a formal report before my shift ended. The next morning, the report disappeared. Chase showed up in the break room carrying a coffee cup with his name printed on it and announced that this year's family day would be Whitmore's rebirth. The line would run at 120% capacity to impress investors coming in from Detroit. Everyone applauded because Douglas was standing by the door. I didn't. That night, after the floor had emptied, I returned to the north column. The crack had grown nearly an inch. I could hear the stamping press echoing through the floor, steady as a clock counting down. I took another time-stamped photograph with my phone and backed it up to a personal hard drive. I had thought I could keep my head down, finish my shifts, and get Noah out of there before trouble found us. Then everything began changing faster than I expected. Because that crack didn't care how badly I wanted an ordinary life, and buildings on the verge of collapse, like arrogant people, usually give plenty of warnings before they pull everyone down with them. I didn't tell anyone that my report had vanished. Not yet. One thing I had learned from years of working around people who were very good at hiding mistakes was this: if you speak too soon, they don't fix the problem. They fix the way the problem is documented. So I began doing the thing people like Douglas Whitmore hate most. I documented everything. I photographed the crack at the beginning and end of every shift, marked its position with a white paint pen, and measured the opening with a set of feeler gauges I bought at Harbor Freight off the interstate. I recorded how many steel coils were stacked on the north level, how long the stamping presses ran, and when the ceiling lights began swaying in the same rhythm. I stopped saving anything on the company computer. Every morning, before leaving the parking lot, I copied the data onto 2 separate hard drives. One stayed in the toolbox under my truck seat. The other I hid inside a pancake mix box in the kitchen cabinet, because no one, including Noah, voluntarily opened pancake mix on a weekday morning. I also began paying attention to people, not just machines. The night shift had about 30 workers, most of them people who had been at Whitmore long enough to know what was broken, but lacked enough authority to demand that it be fixed. There was Frank Delaney, who had lost 2 fingers at another factory in 2009 and now checked every safety lock 3 times. There was Keisha Morgan, a mother of 3 who worked overtime to pay for her husband's insulin. There was Luis Ortega, a 20-year-old who had just left a community baseball program after injuring his shoulder. They didn't need a lecture. They needed to know what to do if the lights went out, the alarm failed, and the nearest manager was busy calling a lawyer. During the 2 a.m. break, I started asking very simple questions. If the west exit is blocked, which way do you go? Where is the manual power disconnect? What sound means the machine is running normally? And what sound means you put down your coffee and run? At first, they looked at me as if I were overreacting. Frank even joked that I was preparing for the end of the world. I told him, the end of the world usually starts with a manager saying it'll only take 5 more minutes. He laughed, but the next time I asked about the backup exit, he answered correctly. Elena didn't participate openly, but she began leaving plant maps on the break room table. Hazard areas were marked in red. No one asked who had done it. In places like Whitmore, solidarity often begins with everyone pretending not to know who helped them. 3 nights later, press number 2 proved I wasn't paranoid. Frank and Luis were changing a steel die inside the machine enclosure. Procedure required shutting off all power, attaching warning tags, and manually checking the hydraulic pressure. Frank had followed every step, but as I walked past, I noticed the amber status light blinking in the wrong pattern. 2 short flashes, 1 long. That wasn't a power fault. It meant an auxiliary controller was still energized. I didn't have time to explain. I grabbed the back of Luis's shirt and yanked him out of the machine, shouting at Frank to move. The steel die, weighing nearly a ton, slammed down exactly where Luis's hand had been less than 2 seconds earlier. The impact silenced the entire section. Luis lay on the floor, eyes wide, one hand clutched to his chest, as though he had only just realized all 5 fingers were still there. Frank cursed in a way I would not repeat in church. I crawled to the control cabinet, removed the panel, and found a jumper wire installed behind the primary lockout system. Someone had deliberately made it possible for the machine to keep receiving remote commands while workers were servicing it. Chase arrived 10 minutes later, carrying an energy drink and wearing the expression of someone interrupted during an important evening. He didn't ask whether Luis was all right. His first question was, "Why is the line stopped?" I held up the jumper wire. Because the safety lockout was bypassed. Chase looked at it, then at the silent machine. "How long until we're running again?" Luis was still sitting on the floor behind me. His face was white. "I don't know yet," I said. "First, we have to inspect every machine with the same controller." Chase let out a hard breath. "No, we are not shutting down the whole section over one false alarm." It wasn't a false alarm. If I had walked past 2 seconds later, Luis wouldn't have a hand. Chase glanced at him as though he had finally remembered there was a human being in the story. "But he still has it." I looked straight at Chase. I had heard sentences like that before. Not those exact words, but the same meaning. Nobody died, so why make a big deal out of it? The building hasn't collapsed, so why evacuate? The bullet didn't hit anyone, so why duck? A good manager, Chase said, knows the difference between fixing a machine and making everyone panic. A good manager, I replied, doesn't wait for somebody to die before believing a machine is dangerous. No one in the plant said a word. Chase stepped closer, near enough that I could smell the mint from his gum. "You're forgetting your place, Mara." "No," I said. I remember exactly where Luis was standing when that die came down. Something changed in Chase's face. It wasn't shame. People like him rarely feel shame right away. It was the irritation of realizing that someone he had placed in the lowest box refused to remain inside the lines he had drawn. He ordered Elena to restart the machine in 30 minutes. Elena said a full inspection was necessary. Chase asked how much longer she wanted to keep her supervisor job. In the end, the line stayed down for almost 4 hours because Frank, Luis, and 11 other workers refused to return. That was the first small reversal. Chase could threaten people one by one, but he couldn't run a factory by himself. The next morning, Luis left a paper bag on the hood of my truck. Inside was a breakfast burrito from the Speedway gas station and a note that read, "My mom says thank you. She isn't ready to raise me all over again." I sat in the truck and read it twice. People sometimes think the biggest acts of their lives will be recognized with medals or speeches. Usually they aren't. Sometimes they are marked by a cold burrito and the shaky handwriting of a young man who has just realized how close he came to losing his ordinary life. Then Chase turned his attention to Noah. My son discovered a pallet of drive shafts stacked unevenly in the warehouse. A manager ordered him to drive the forklift across a section of floor marked with a load limit warning. Noah refused. He said the straps were loose and the weight had shifted to one side. Chase happened to be there with his cameraman. Instead of inspecting the pallet, he turned on the camera. "Look at this," Chase said, pointing the lens at Noah. "We've got a second safety expert in the family." Noah stood beside the forklift, his face red, but he didn't lower his head. Chase handed him an old reflective vest. The words "Safety Monitor" had been written across the back with black tape. "Put it on. If you're that afraid of real work, you can walk around the warehouse picking up trash and warning everyone about scary boxes." A few workers laughed, but I knew that kind of laughter. No one was amused. They simply didn't know what else to do while the boss's son held the camera and his father held their health insurance. Noah put on the vest. That hurt more than if he had thrown it down and hit Chase. He wore it because he needed the money. Because he knew I was paying the mortgage and the last of his father's medical bills. Because at 16, my son already understood too well that dignity sometimes has to stand in line behind the electric bill. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, pushing macaroni around with his fork without eating. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked. "Tired of what?" "Of letting them think you're nobody." I set down my glass. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to take the red helmet from the truck box, place it on the table, and show him my name stitched inside. I wanted to tell him I had once commanded more than 60 people at scenes where one wrong decision could kill the entire team. But if I used my past to win an argument with my own child, I wouldn't be so different from Chase. I would still be using a title to force someone to see me the way I wanted to be seen. "I know who I am," I said. "The harder part is not letting other people decide who I have to become." Noah looked at me with the particular disappointment only a child can give a mother, the look that makes you feel you have said something true and completely useless. "That sounds good," he said, "but tomorrow I still have to wear that vest." He stood, left his food untouched, and went upstairs. I remained at the table alone. I had thought that if I taught my son restraint, he would understand I was protecting him. But to Noah, my restraint was beginning to look like surrender. And I didn't know which frightened me more, that Chase would keep humiliating him, or that Noah would learn the only way to preserve his dignity was to become aggressive like Chase. The next day, I took all my evidence to Douglas Whitmore's conference room. I laid the crack photographs, vibration data, report on the jumper wire, and load diagrams on the table. Douglas looked at the first page for less than 10 seconds before pushing everything back. "You were hired to do maintenance," he said, "not to teach my family how to run this plant. The plant is overloaded. The sensors are disconnected. A press nearly crushed a worker's hand." Douglas adjusted the button on his suit jacket. But nobody was hurt. I looked at him and understood where Chase had learned that sentence. If you run the line at 120% during family day, the north section could become unstable. Chase sat beside his father with his arms crossed. "Here comes the apocalypse again." Douglas stood, signaling the meeting was over. "You will do the work assigned to you and keep your disaster predictions to yourself. If I hear that you are threatening the employees again, you won't need to come back." I gathered my papers. Before walking out, I turned and said, "You can fire me. You can't fire gravity." That evening, Elena sent my photographs to Fire Chief Raymond Cole without telling me. He called back almost immediately. I didn't hear the conversation, but Elena later told me that when she said my name, the other end went silent for a few seconds. "Does she know you called me?" Raymond asked. "No, if Mara Bennett says that structure is unsafe," he replied. "Don't stand inside it arguing with her." That was the second time someone trusted me before I had to explain who I was. I went home and told Noah he was not allowed to attend the plant's family day. He looked at me. "Because of Chase?" "No. Then why?" I thought about the crack, the jumper wire, and Douglas's cold expression when he said no one had been hurt. I decided I would not lie to my son anymore. Because I'm not sure that building still wants to stay standing. Noah didn't ask anything else. But the next morning, when Chase's promotional video appeared online, I saw my son watch it twice. In the video, Chase stood in the center of the plant, grinning into the camera, and announcing that Whitmore Components would operate at the highest capacity in its history to prove the pessimists wrong. Behind his voice, so faint that almost no one would have noticed, I could hear metal groaning like something alive, being forced to bear more than it was meant to carry. I had thought I was choosing between keeping my job and speaking up. By then, I understood the real choice was between losing my job and spending the rest of my life remembering that I had known what was coming and turned away anyway. And that was something I could not carry again. Saturday morning, the parking lot at Whitmore Components looked more like a county fair than a factory sitting on an overloaded structure. Red and white striped tents had been raised beside the loading area, cornhole boards were set up on the grass, and a local country band had been hired to play on a temporary stage. The High School Parent Association was selling apple pies to raise money for the football team. Children were given yellow plastic hard hats with the Whitmore logo on the front. Douglas had a giant banner hung over the factory doors that read Building Bell, with your future, as if a slogan printed large enough could keep steel from breaking. I arrived at 8 in the morning, 2 hours before the gates opened. I wasn't wearing my company uniform. I wore jeans, old safety boots, and a navy jacket faded at the elbows. In the truck box were my red rescue helmet, a harness, an old radio, and a tool bag I had not fully opened in almost 4 years. I told Noah to stay home. I even left him $20 for pizza and repeated 3 times that he was not to come anywhere near the factory. I thought I had sounded serious enough for a 16-year-old to listen. I was wrong. Elena met me at the east entrance. She wore a company polo but no employee badge. Douglas locked me out of the safety system this morning, she said. They said I didn't need to monitor the sensors during Family Day because it might scare the guests. The sensors are still disconnected? In the north section, yes. I looked through the glass doors toward the stage. Chase was testing the microphone and laughing with his cameraman while a group of children ran directly beneath the steel storage floor. That familiar coldness spread from my chest into my stomach. It wasn't panic. I had stopped confusing it with panic a long time ago. It was the feeling of your body understanding a situation before the rest of you was ready to admit it. Get the families out of the north section, I said. Elena looked toward Douglas. He'll fire me on the spot. Maybe. She said nothing. I can't promise you'll keep your job, I said. I can only tell you that if the load keeps increasing, I don't trust that floor to hold all those people. Elena looked at the children in plastic hard hats. One little girl was sitting on her father's shoulders, holding a small American flag that had been handed out at the gate. All right, she said. I'll tell them the north section has to be closed for demonstrations set up. That is often how decent people begin resisting a bad system. Not with a grand speech. Just with a small lie that gets children out of danger. By 10 o'clock, the factory was packed. A local radio station had set up a broadcast table near the assembly line. 2 city council members stood beside Douglas wearing brand new safety glasses without a single scratch. Chase moved through the crowd, shaking investors' hands, calling workers by name when the camera was pointed at them, then forgetting those names the moment the lens turned away. I checked the column base one last time. The crack had opened wide enough to accept the tip of a small knife. The white paint mark I had made 3 nights earlier was visibly misaligned. I called Fire Chief Raymond Cole. Raymond, I need your crew standing by. There was a pause on the other end. Are you inside? Yes, Mara, get out. I'll leave after the families are out, he sighed. You have always been the worst person at following your own advice, and you still talk too much when you should be dispatching trucks. They're rolling now. I had just put away my phone when I saw Noah standing beside the high school cheerleaders' lemonade booth. He wore a black hoodie and was trying to make himself small behind a group of classmates, as if I wouldn't recognize my own son in a crowd of hundreds. I walked straight to him. I told you to stay home. I know. Then why are you here? He looked over my shoulder toward the plant. Because you said the building might collapse, and then you came here alone. You thought I was going to sit at home playing Xbox? I wanted to be angry. I truly did. But when I looked at his face, I didn't see rebellion. I saw fear. He had heard enough to understand that I was walking into a dangerous place, and he couldn't accept that the last time he might see his mother was when I shut the truck door that morning. You stay with Elena, I said. If she tells you to run, you run. You do not come back for me. You do not play hero. Noah frowned. You just described yourself. That's how I know how stupid it is. He almost smiled, but Chase had spotted us. Well, the whole safety expert family is here, he said into the microphone. Every head turned toward us. Chase's cameraman immediately raised the camera. I felt Noah stiffen beside me. Chase stepped down from the stage, picked up a mop leaning near an ice tub, and held it out to me. Mara, if you insist on saving the world today, you can start with that oil spill over there. A few people laughed. This time the laughter was weaker. Word about the press had spread across the shifts. Some workers knew I had saved Luisa's hand, but no one wanted to be the first person to stand publicly beside me while Douglas Whitmore was watching. I didn't take the mop. Chase held the microphone near my mouth. Mara believes our factory is about to collapse. She has spent the whole week frightening workers over a little rust. But today we're going to show these investors the difference between real operational experience and the imagination of a night shift employee. I didn't look at the camera. I looked up at the steel beams. The hanging lights were swaying in the same direction. Rust dust was falling in small bursts. At the end of the north level, a joint opened each time the press cycled, then closed as the piston returned. "Stop the line," I said. Chase's smile widened. "Are you giving me an order?" "Stop the line and evacuate the north section." "In front of all these people, you really think you have the authority?" "I'm not giving you an order." I looked him directly in the eyes. "I'm giving you a chance to choose before the building chooses for you." The crowd went silent. For 1 second, I thought Chase might back down. I saw hesitation flicker across his face. Then he saw the camera, his father, and the investors waiting for a show. Some people do the right thing when no one is watching. Chase was the opposite. The more people watched, the less capable he was of admitting he was afraid. He turned toward the control room and raised his hand. "Take it to 120%. Elena shouted. "Chase, don't." The stamping presses accelerated. The first cycle made the floor vibrate beneath my boots. The second caused a row of lights to go dark. On the third, a sound came from overhead. Not loud and dramatic, the way it would be in a movie. Just a low pop, like a truck tire blowing out far away. A load-bearing bolt nearly a foot long shot from its connection, spun through the air and struck the concrete floor. "Everybody down!" I shouted. The north steel platform dropped nearly 6 inches. The coils above began to shift. When 40 tons of metal starts rolling, it does not make a sound that any human being should hear inside a building full of children. Steel grinding against steel shook the entire factory. People screamed. Part of the elevated stairway folded and crashed into the production line, splitting the crowd in two. The main lights went out completely. The alarm did not sound. Of course it didn't. They had disabled it. In the darkness, everyone began running toward the same door. That is how crowds kill people even before the building gets the chance. I climbed onto a pallet and shouted in a voice I had not used in years. "Stop! Nobody runs." I don't know how many people recognized that the voice did not belong to a maintenance worker, but they stopped. Maybe because I was loud enough. Maybe because, in chaos, people will hold on to anyone who sounds as if they know what to do. "Elena, take the children and families through the east exit. Frank, shut down the main power. Do not use the control panel. Keisha, count people as they leave. Luis, get forklift number 3 and block the north aisle. Nobody crosses the yellow line." They obeyed. No questions, no arguments. I heard Noah call my name, but I didn't look back. If I had seen his face then, I wasn't sure I could have held on to the part that needed to stay cold and clear. An overhead steel frame bent downward. I counted the vibration cycle. 4 seconds. Then 3. The resonance was increasing. "We have less than 2 minutes before the next collapse," I shouted. A man's leg was trapped under the radio booth. Frank and I lifted it just high enough for Keisha to pull him free. A little boy was crying because he couldn't find his mother. I took him by the shoulders and made him look into my eyes.
"What's your name?"
Ben, listen to me. Your mom is going out through the You're going with Ms. Elena. Can you do that?" He nodded. "Good. I need you to help the grown-ups remember which way to go." He stopped crying long enough to run after Elena. Then I heard Chase. "Mara." He was trapped near the base of the stage. When the floor tilted, a lighting frame had fallen, pinning part of his jacket and one leg beneath a steel bar. His phone lay a few feet away with the screen still lit. The live stream was still running. Douglas stood in a safer area, shouting for someone to pull his son out, but he did not move toward him. I ran over. Chase looked at me with a completely different face from the one that had grinned at the camera. The smugness was gone. The title was gone. He was simply a 25-year-old man who had just learned that metal did not care how rich his father was. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "I didn't know it would." "Save your breath," I said. "Apologize after you're still alive." The steel bar was too heavy to lift by hand. I hooked a cable to the frame, signaled Luis to bring the forklift into position, and used a pry bar to create space beneath Chase's leg. Another crack sounded above us. "Mara!" Noah shouted from the east door. I saw him trying to come back. Stay there. It may have been the first time in his life Noah heard me use my command voice. He stopped instantly. Luis pulled the cable. The steel frame rose a few inches. I grabbed Chase by the collar and yanked. His leg had barely cleared when part of the upper floor came down. I forced him flat and covered his head with my body. Pieces of metal hammered against the back of my jacket. A steel beam landed less than 2 feet from our heads. When the dust settled, Chase was crying, not loudly. Tears simply ran toward his temples while he stared at me as though he could not understand why the person he had humiliated was using her own body to shield him. I pulled him up. "Can you walk?" He nodded. "Then help me get other people out." That was his second shock. I did not let him become a victim lying there waiting to be pitied. If he could still stand, he had to help. The fire department arrived. While we were temporarily supporting a west side beam with forklift tines and timber posts from the packing area. Raymond Cole came through the door in a white helmet, looked at the cable system I had rigged, then looked directly at me. "Captain Bennett," he called. "I need an assessment of the west side right now." The entire area went almost silent. A local reporter filming from outside the fence asked, "Captain, who is she?" Raymond never took his eyes off the sagging ceiling. "Mara Bennett used to command the Midwest Emergency Response Structural Collapse Rescue Team," he said. "Half the people on my crew learned how to enter a falling building and still make it home because of her." I didn't look at Douglas, but in the corner of my vision I saw the color drain from his face. Elena stood near the door, sweat and dust covering her, but she gave the faintest smile. Noah looked at me as if a door had opened inside his mind and revealed a room he had never known existed. Chase was placed on a stretcher. Before the paramedics carried him away, he caught my wrist. "Why did you save me?" It was not a question for show. He had no camera in his hand and no crowd he wanted to impress. He was only a young man who had just realized that he had placed his life in the hands of the person he had treated worst. Because having the ability to save someone, I said, doesn't give me the right to decide whether that person deserves it. He released my wrist. Chase's phone had recorded almost everything: his mockery, my warning to stop the line, his order to increase capacity, the bolt tearing free, and the woman he had called a janitor crawling into the collapse zone to pull him out. By that evening, the live stream had been shared across the state. But as the last ambulance left the lot, Douglas walked toward me. Dust coated his collar, yet his voice still carried the cold certainty of a man who believed power was something he could put back on like a suit jacket. "You're going to pay for this," he said quietly. "You humiliated my family in front of the whole town." I looked past him toward the sealed factory, where children's plastic hard hats lay scattered on the ground. "You still think what happened today was about your family's honor," I said. "That is exactly why it happened." The next morning, an envelope was delivered to my house. Inside was my termination letter. It came with a notice that Douglas Whitmore had formally accused me of sabotaging equipment, unlawfully interfering with plant operations, and deliberately creating a disaster so I could prove myself right. I read the letter once and set it on the table. Noah stood behind me in silence. I had thought saving more than 200 people would be the hardest part. But people like Douglas are not afraid of the truth while it is still lying beneath the rubble. They only begin to fear it when the truth stands up, brushes the dust from its clothes, and prepares to explain exactly what happened. By noon on Sunday, Douglas Whitmore had already appeared on the local news wearing a grave expression and the blue tie he always chose when he wanted to look like a father to the community. He stood outside the sealed factory gates with fire trucks and yellow caution tape behind him and told reporters that the Whitmore family was fully cooperating with authorities in the investigation of a deliberate act of equipment interference. He did not mention me by name at first, but within minutes, a reporter asked whether he was referring to maintenance worker Mara Bennett. Douglas lowered his head for exactly one beat, as though it pained him deeply to say what came next. "We have reason to believe that an individual with advanced experience in structural collapse manipulated safety systems in order to create a chaotic situation," he said. "My family only wants the truth." I watched the segment on the small television in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Noah leaned against the counter behind me. He said nothing until Douglas called the incident a staged performance. Then my son stepped forward, snatched the remote, and shut off the television so hard that the battery cover popped loose. "He knows you saved Chase," he said. "The whole town saw it." I bent down and picked up the battery from the floor. Knowing the truth and accepting the truth are two different things. Noah paced through the kitchen with both hands clenched. "Are you just going to sit here? He's saying you almost killed everyone." I understood his anger. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the television station, spread every photograph across the desk, and force Douglas to look at the dates and timestamps. But I had seen what happened when someone telling the truth allowed anger to choose the timing and manner of their response. Evidence does not become stronger because you shout louder. "I'm not going to stay silent," I said, "but I'm not going to let him decide how I react either." On Monday morning, Whitmore's attorney came to my house. His name was Calvin Morse. He wore a charcoal suit and shoes so clean, I guessed he had never stepped onto a factory floor in his life. He placed a folder on the kitchen table beside the peanut butter jar Noah had forgotten to put away. The offer was simple. The company would pay me the equivalent of 3 years' salary, continue Noah's health insurance through the end of the school year, and agree not to pursue a civil claim if I signed a statement admitting that I had acted beyond my authority. I would have to agree that my assessments were personal opinions, that my interference with line operations might have contributed to the chaos, and that I would not speak to the media. Calvin pushed a pen towards me. "This is a good way out, Ms. Bennett. You keep your dignity. The company preserves its ability to operate. Everyone moves on." I read to the end and asked, "If I sign this, what happens to the safety reports that were deleted?" He adjusted his cuff. "I have no information regarding any deleted reports. The disabled sensors? That is a technical matter under review." And the person who ordered the line to run at 120%. Calvin was silent for a few seconds before saying, "You need to think about the workers. If this drags on, the factory may never reopen. Hundreds of families could lose their income. It was the blow I had known they would use, not threatening me. Threatening the people I cared about, then asking me to feel guilty if I refused to accept a lie." I looked through the window. Across the street, the flag in front of my neighbor's house was flying at half-staff because a local veteran had just died. Bellwether was the kind of place where people held spaghetti dinners in church basements to help pay one another's cancer bills, but it was also the kind of place where a business owner could hold an entire town hostage with 2 words: job losses. "I am thinking about the workers," I said. "That's why I'm not signing." The courtesy disappeared from Calvin's face. He took back the pen and told me to prepare for a long, expensive lawsuit. After he left, Noah stepped out of the hallway. He had heard nearly everything. "You saved them," he said. "Why are you still worried about hurting Douglas?" I sat down beside him. "I'm not worried about hurting Douglas. I'm worried that innocent people will be buried under the consequences of what he did. Being right does not mean we get to stop caring about the people trapped in the middle." The official investigation began that afternoon. Investigator Dana Price arrived with 2 state structural engineers. Dana did not hold my hand for long, praise me for the video, or act impressed when Raymond described my background. I liked her immediately. People who are truly good at their jobs rarely need to turn an introduction into a performance. She asked me one question: "Can you prove that you warned them before the incident?" I placed both hard drives, the log Elena had given me, the time-stamped photographs, copies of my emails, and the vibration data on the table. Dana examined a few files and looked up. "Why did you keep 2 copies?" "Because the first report disappeared." She did not react dramatically. She only wrote another line in her notebook. That was when I knew Douglas had created a much bigger problem than he understood. The evidence came together quickly. Server records showed that my report had been opened through Chase's administrator account and deleted 17 minutes later. You weren't? Warehouse cameras showed a technician disconnecting the sensors after receiving verbal instructions from the executive office. The live stream clearly recorded me demanding that the line be stopped and Chase ordering an increase in output. Elena, Frank, Keisha, and Luis all gave separate statements, but their details matched almost perfectly. Luis even brought the paper bag from the burrito he had given me, with the store owner's timestamp printed on the receipt, because he said it helped him remember the exact day the press almost crushed his hand. Dana looked at it and said, "This may be the strangest piece of evidence I've ever received." Luis replied, "Mom, it was also the most important breakfast of my life." Within a week, the investigation was no longer limited to the collapse. Because Douglas had formally accused me of sabotage and demanded a comprehensive review, authorities were required to examine the plant's entire safety history. They found 3 years of inspection records with altered dates, 5 workplace accidents settled in cash to avoid reporting requirements, and tens of thousands of dollars diverted from the maintenance budget to a consulting firm whose only address was a mailbox in Delaware. A county inspector had signed a certification stating that the alarm system was fully operational during the same month it was disconnected. His bank records showed 2 consulting fee payments from a company owned by Douglas's sister-in-law. Worse, timesheets for temporary workers had been altered to erase overtime hours. Some employees had lost thousands of dollars in wages over the years without ever knowing it. Douglas began calling it a witch hunt. He went on a conservative morning radio show and claimed the state government was trying to destroy American family business because of pressure from a disgruntled employee. But every time he said more, Dana received another witness. A former accountant brought copies of the ledgers. An electrical contractor turned over messages in which Chase demanded that he bypass code requirements to meet the Family Day deadline. A retired worker sent photographs of the crack from 2 years earlier. People who had remained silent for years finally began to understand that they were not standing alone. Chase stayed silent longer than anyone. His father told him to testify that I had tampered with the alarm system on the night before Family Day. Douglas promised that if they both kept to the same story, the company could survive. Chase nearly agreed. I learned later that he sat in a lawyer's office for more than 3 hours with the statement in front of him. Then Douglas went too far. He suggested claiming that Noah might have accidentally damaged the sensors while working in the warehouse. A 16-year-old boy, the son of the woman Douglas wanted to destroy, was the perfect target. Little power, little money, and young enough to be dismissed as careless. That night, Chase drove to Dana's office. No camera, no father, no attorney. He turned over emails demanding the increased production rate, messages ordering the deletion of my report, and an audio recording from a meeting in which Douglas said, "If the alarm keeps sounding, disconnect it. People don't invest in a factory that sounds like it's panicking." When Dana asked why he was telling the truth now, Chase said, "Because I've spent my whole life letting my father turn other people into sacrifices. I'm not going to let him do it to a kid." I did not call that courage. Not yet. Courage would have been telling the truth before the building collapsed. But it was the first step Chase had taken without a crowd applauding, and sometimes real change begins very late, after a person has lost almost everything he used to pretend he was fine. 2 days later, Douglas was stripped of control of the factory. Company accounts were placed under supervision, contracts were suspended, and his office was searched. He faced charges involving falsified records, bribery, wage theft, and obstruction of an investigation. Chase lost his position, his promotional contracts, and nearly the entire image of young leadership he had spent years building. The most watched video bearing his name was no longer the one where he stood in front of the production line talking about the future. It was the one where he mocked a woman minutes before that same woman pulled him out from under a pile of steel. I was offered a settlement and the right to pursue a separate lawsuit against the Whitmore family. I made only 3 demands. Workers had to receive their full wages and benefits while the factory remained closed. Every future safety report had to be stored in an independent system that management could not delete on its own, and no young worker, including Noah, could ever be used as a scapegoat for the wrongdoing of adults. One afternoon, Chase came to see me outside the community center. His leg was still in a brace. He said he wanted to apologize. "I'm not the first person you need to apologize to," I said. "I'm only the last person you can no longer keep looking down on." I handed him a list of names: Luis, Frank, Elena, Keisha, Noah, and more than a dozen others whom he had filmed, mocked, or pressured into silence. Chase stared at the list for a long time. A week later, he appeared at the town workers' meeting. For the first time since I had known him, Chase Whitmore entered a room without a phone in his hand, without his father behind him, and without anyone being paid to make him look better than he really was. The workers' meeting was held in the fellowship hall of the Baptist Church on Main Street, where people in Bellwether usually gathered for chilly fundraisers, graduation parties, and arguments about whether the high school football team could make the playoffs that year. That night, there was no food, no band, and no one was in the mood to talk about football. Nearly 200 workers sat on brown folding chairs. Some still wore jackets bearing the Whitmore logo because those were the warmest coats they owned. When Chase entered, the room became so quiet that the sound of his leg brace against the wooden floor was painfully clear. No phone, no cameraman, no lawyer, and no Douglas behind him to turn every mistake into someone else's fault. Chase stood in front of the pulpit but did not step onto it. Maybe for the first time in his life, he understood that standing a few steps above other people did not make him more worthy of being heard. He pulled a sheet of paper from his pocket, looked at it for a moment, then folded it again. "I was going to read a statement," he said, "but a lawyer wrote it, and I think everyone here has heard enough words written to protect me." No one laughed. Chase swallowed and began calling people by name. Luis, whose hand he had nearly allowed the machine to take because he did not want to stop the line. Frank, who had been threatened with losing his job after reporting a broken lockout system. Keisha, who had been forced to work overtime without receiving full pay. Elena, who had run the plant for years while Chase received a title because of his last name. Then he said Noah's name. "I humiliated a 16-year-old boy because he did what I wasn't brave enough to do," Chase said. He saw danger and said no. Several workers turned toward Noah. He sat beside me with both hands deep in the pockets of his hoodie. I felt his shoulders tighten, but he did not lower his head. Chase did not ask people to forget what had happened. He did not say that he was young, that his father had pressured him, or that he had only been trying to save the company. That was what made his apology different from the ones before. He was not trying to reduce his guilt so he could feel better. "I thought leadership meant always looking like the strongest person in the room," he said. "So anyone who knew more than I did became a threat. Anyone who told me no became someone I had to humiliate. I wasn't running the factory. I was turning it into my stage." Not everyone forgave him. Frank stood and said he was not ready to shake Chase's hand. Keisha said an apology would not return the wages that had been taken from her. A man in the back row shouted that Chase was only sorry because he had been caught. Chase did not argue. He stood there and took it all. I think that was the first thing resembling accountability I had ever seen from him. An apology is not a ticket that allows the person who caused harm to leave the room feeling forgiven. Sometimes it is only the willingness to stand still inside the discomfort you created. After the meeting, Chase spoke with Noah in the parking lot. Streetlights made the old snow along the curb glow gray. I stood far enough away that they would not feel watched, but close enough to step in if necessary. Chase said, "I called you the janitor's kid because I thought your mother's job made both of you beneath me." Noah looked at him. "My mother was a maintenance worker," he said. "There was never anything shameful about that." Chase nodded. I know that now." He apologized for the vest, the pallet, and the video. Noah did not say they were okay. He did not promise immediate forgiveness. He only said, "I don't need you to like me. I need you to stop turning other people into content." Chase said it was the fairest thing anyone had ever told him. Whitmore Components reopened almost 4 months later under court supervision and an independent management board. Douglas's name was no longer on the executive directory. He later pleaded guilty to several charges, was ordered to repay stolen wages, and lost ownership of most of the company. I did not follow every court hearing. I had learned that some chapters only require knowing that they ended. You do not have to read every line. Elena became director of operations. On the day she was appointed, workers placed an old folding chair in her new office instead of a leather executive chair. A reminder that the best person to run a factory is someone who still remembers what it feels like to sit among the people who make its products. I was offered a position on the new leadership team. I turned it down. I did not want to sit in an office reading reports about dangerous places. I wanted to stand beside the people who could keep those places from becoming dangerous in the first. The county established the Bellwether Industrial Safety Training Center in an old fire station. I accepted the job as director, although Noah said my first business card looked as though it had been printed at a copy shop in 1998. I told him at least they had spelled my name correctly. On opening day, I hung my old red rescue helmet on the wall. Beside it was the bolt that had torn loose from the steel platform during Family Day. A trainee asked why I kept something that had almost killed so many people. I told him that major disasters are usually remembered for the moment they happen, but what matters more are all the warnings that came first. We placed a small plaque beneath it. Most disasters give warnings. Pride is what makes us just ignore them. Noah enrolled in a structural engineering program that spring. One day he came home and told me that a student had been cornered against a locker by a group of bigger boys. Noah did not hit anyone. He walked over, stood beside the boy, called a teacher, and did not leave until an adult arrived. "Were you scared?" I asked. He shrugged. "Yeah, but you said staying calm doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It just means you don't let fear choose what you do." I turned toward the sink and washed a cup so he would not see my eyes fill. Children rarely tell their parents which lessons truly stayed with them. One day, they simply surprise you by living them. Chase moved to Indiana and entered an industrial safety apprenticeship program. He started at the bottom, inspecting equipment and cleaning work areas like the people he had once looked down on. I do not know what kind of man he will become. Change is not one beautiful moment followed by an ending. It is waking up every day and choosing not return to the person you used to be, even when no one is applauding. 1 year after the incident, Noah and I passed the factory on a cold morning. First shift workers were walking through the gate carrying Dunkin' cups and lunch boxes. Before, many of them had looked through me, as though the gray uniform made me blend into the wall. Now they stopped to say hello, not because they knew about my past, not because Raymond had called me captain in front of a camera. They greeted me because they finally understood that the woman kneeling beside the base of a machine had never been small. She was simply doing work that people with titles had been too busy to see. Noah asked, "Do you ever wish they had known who you were sooner?" I looked through the fence at the new steel platform, where the safety sensors blinked green. "No," I said. "I only wish they had listened before they needed to know." I used to think strength meant walking into a place that was collapsing and bringing people out. But Bellwether taught me that sometimes strength means speaking up before the first crack is heard, standing beside someone who is being humiliated, and refusing to let others mistake your calmness for permission to continue. Weak people often need an entire room to fear them. Strong people only need to know when to step forward, who needs protection, and when it is time to set power down before it hurts one more person. Mara's story reminds us that a person's true worth is not measured by the title on a business card, the clothes they wear, or the way others treat them in a crowded room. Some people stay quiet not because they are weak, but because life has taught them that anger does not always lead to justice. Still, patience does not mean we must keep accepting disrespect, hiding wrongdoing, or protecting systems that harm innocent people. There are moments when speaking up is not only our right, but also our responsibility to those who do not yet feel safe enough to speak for themselves. As the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. Mara never needed to recite her past accomplishments to prove who she was. The way she paid attention, protected others, and held on to her humanity, even when dealing with people who had humiliated her, said more than any title ever could. Her story also reminds us not to wait until the building finally collapses before we take the warning signs seriously. The same is true in our workplaces, our families, and our relationships. When disrespect, manipulation, and toxic silence continue for too long, trust what you are seeing. Keep a record of the truth, seek out people you can trust, and set clear boundaries. We reap what we sow, but justice does not always arrive with a loud crash. Sometimes it begins quietly, with one ordinary person deciding that today they will no longer look the other way. What part of Mara's journey stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts, a similar experience from your own life, in the comments below. Please like this video to support the channel and subscribe so you do not miss more dramatic, heartfelt, and thought-provoking stories. May you always have the calm to recognize the truth, the courage to stand up for what is right, and the peace to move forward after the storm has passed.